Okay, the answer to the Nubian slash Igbo slash Olmec slash ancient civilization terracotta stone figure is that, oh, just because they're dark skinned doesn't mean they're Nubian. Just because they got these huge fucking lips, these gigantic nostrils, and they're flared out typically like an African, like I'm an African giving you the mug, doesn't mean that they were African. It says the earliest people in the Americas were people of the Negritic African race who entered the Americas perhaps as early as 100,000 years ago by the way of Bering Strait, and about 30 years ago in a worldwide maritime undertaking that included journeys from the then wet and lake-filled Sahara toward the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, and from West Africa, according to the Gladwin thesis. The ancient journey occurred particularly about 75,000 years ago and included black pygmies, black Negritic tribes, and black Australoids similar to the Aboriginal black people, Australian, and parts of Asia, including India. This theory actually makes somewhat sense if you switch the words a little bit. When they say the earliest people, and they say what kind of race they were, we are talking about an earlier peoples than that. I do believe that there was an earlier migration than anthropologists have come to a consensus about. I don't agree particularly with the date, but let's go on to the next. See, so he jumps from 100,000 years ago with no evidence to 1,000, to 3,000 years ago with some evidence. With quite a bit of evidence. But so to me, that's not a fair assumption to make. But anyway, it says recent discoveries in the fields of linguistics and other methods have shown without a doubt that the ancient Olmecs of Mexico, known as the Z people, originally came from West Africa and were of the Mende ethnic stock, according to Clyde A. Winters and other writers. The Mende script was discovered on some of the ancient Olmec monuments of Mexico and were found to be identical to the very same script used by the Mende of West Africa. Although the carbon-14 date for the presence of black Olmecs or Z people is about 1500 BC, journeys to the Mexico and southern United States may have come from West Africa much earlier, particularly around 5,000 years before Christ. The conclusion is based on the finding of an African native cotton that was discovered in North America. Its only possible manner of arriving where it was found had to have been through human hands. At that period in West African history, and even before civilization was in full bloom in the Western Sahara, in what is today Mauritania, one of Africa's earliest civilizations, the Zing Empire, existed and may have lived in what was a lake-filled, wet, and fertile Sahara where ships crisscrossed from place to place. So they're saying before the Sahara was desert, it was actually water, and that actually makes some sense. That would explain some of the water erosion on the pyramids, and the fact that, at the bottom of the ocean creates a beach. But anyway, it goes on to say, any bodies of water. It goes on to say that ancient African kingdoms produced Olmec-type cultures. And it talks about, the coastal belt, Cameroon to Guinea. It talks about the Ivory Coast and Phoenicians and other peoples. They traded with the Phoenicians and other peoples, They talk about the Arabs, the Middle Ages, the 5th century, So we go down to some of the stove carvings. And this is the ancient African Oni, or king. It's similar to the shaman, right? And we go on. It talks about the shamans of priest kings. It talks about the African king of Olmi, the shaman of Africa. It talks about the ancient trades between America and Africa. This is kind of important. The earliest trade and commercial activities between prehistoric and ancient Africa from the Americas may have occurred from West Africa and may have yet shipped and traveled across the Atlantic. The history of West Africa has never been properly researched, yet there is ample evidence to show that the West African of 1500 BC was at a level of civilization approaching that of ancient Egypt and Nubia Kush. In fact, there were similarities between the cultures of Nubia and West Africa, even in the very similarities between the small-scale hard brick clay burial pyramids built for West African kings in Kukia in pre-Christian Ghana and their counterparts in Nubia, Egypt and Mesoamerica. So some of you asked me, okay, if the Igbos are African, where are the pyramids? We go on. Although West Africa is not commonly known for having a culture of pyramid building, such a culture existed, although pyramids were created for the burial kings and were made of hardened brick. Of course, they're for burial. That's what they're for. The style of pyramid building was closer to what built in the Olmecs in Mexico when the first Olmecs pyramid were built. In fact, they were not built of stone, but of hardened clay and compact earth. Still, even though we don't see pyramids of stone rising above the ground in West Africa, similar to those in Egypt, Nubia, or Mexico of massive obelisks, colossal monuments, and structures of the Nubian or Kemetic or Mesoamerican civilization, the facts remain that they did exist in West Africa on a smaller scale, where such as an environment more hospitable to building and free of detriments such as malaria and the tsetse fly made it much easier to build on a grander scale. There's the step pyramid of Saqqara. There's the Mesoamerican pyramid, and as you can see, they're very similar, but the step pyramid is more massive and it's older. Same thing I said, you know, in my Illuminati Part 1. So this is the ancient Nubian sea vessel. Okay. This is from the Bronze Age. It says the Olmec civilization began to bloom and furnish new conditions in the Mediterranean Sea, made it more difficult for West Africans to trade by sea with the region. Although their land trade across the Sahara was flourishing by then, Greeks, Phoenicians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and others were trying to gain control of the sea routes and the trading ports of the region. Conflicts of the region may have pushed the West Africans to strengthen their transatlantic trade with the Americas and explore and settle there. So they have theories about what happens. I only got a couple minutes left here, so let me wrap this up. You see, it talks about Nekau, a pharaoh of Egypt that sent ships to circumvent Africa around 450 BC. They could have easily gotten lost and kept pushing all the way to America. It's quite possible. Except for, where is the DNA evidence of this? You know, where's the human genome? Are they the same people and the mutation occurred because they were separated? You know, there's a lot of things to consider here. This is an interesting theory, but okay, basically there was early Africans in America, and that may be where some of this confusion comes from. But you're going to see a lot of evidence that shows something to that effect. Yeah, they were native people. They look like Africans, and they were related to Africans because of when they migrated and the lack of European empires and other empires breeding with them. Kept their dark skin, kept their African look. It also supports the idea that the original people on the planet were black, not Neanderthal, Caucasoids. Now, if I got 1 minute left, so let me just show you some of these pictures and end it there. Okay, let me read this one last part about the anthropologists. During the International Congress of American Anthropologists held in Barcelona, Spain, a French anthropologist pointed out that all that was missing to prove a definite presence of Negroid blacks in the Americas before Columbus was Negroid skeletons to add to the already found Negroid featured terracotals. Later on, February 1975, skeletons of Negroid people dating back to the 1200s were found at a pre-Columbian grave in the Virgin Islands. Andrew Wazerski, the Polish craniologist, also concluded, based on the study of skeletons found found in Mexico that a good portion of the skulls were that of Negritic blacks. Based on the many findings for a black African Negroid presence in ancient Mexico, many of the most enthusiastic proponents of a pre-Columbian black African presence in Mexico are Mexican professionals. They conclude that Africans must have established early important trading centers on the coasts of Veracruz, from which Middle American civilization grew. Okay, so these goes on to show you about the Hispanics and the Susu economics, and it gives you some sources. Okay.